Are you the Devil Forge Master?
I am.
Then this is the hour of your death.
It's so interesting to find out how Castlevania hides some of its biggest answers in plain sight. After you beat the game, you walk away thinking you've understood everything, but then you look closer and suddenly you realise that the timeline doesn't quite add up in the way it should have. I am talking about the timeline of Trevor Belmont, who became a legend after he defeated the Dracula in 1476. He carried the vampire killer when the world needed it most, and still, just 3 years later in Castlevania Curse of Darkness, we see him getting stabbed through the chest and the story ends. No funeral or final words, not even a confirmation over his status. Over the years, fans have argued that Trevor died in 1479, but there are a lot of people also believing that he might have survived. So today, I'll dive deep into the timeline and find out what really happened to Trevor Belmont after Curse of Darkness.
You must show me just how much power you've gained.
So what actually happens to Trevor in Curse of Darkness? Before we understand what happened with Trevor in 1479, we must understand his role in Curse of Darkness. Here, he is not the protagonist of the game. The protagonist of Curse of Darkness is the Devil Forge Master who had once served Dracula. The entire game revolves around Hector hunting Isaac, who is another Forge Master seeking revenge. Trevor is not the central hero here, but just a veteran presence. After all, as the Belmont who has already defeated Dracula once, Trevor is a reminder of 1476, but then he is forced to re-enter the conflict when he sees Isaac still spreading chaos even after Dracula's fall. And at one point, we even see Trevor using his own blood to open a gateway to the infinite corridor. You know how Belmont blood is powerful because it's tied to Dracula's magic. Trevor knows this fact and uses that power to pursue Isaac. He decides to step into the dangerous supernatural dimension because he understands the stakes. Eventually, Trevor is able to track Isaac into the infinite corridor where a clash happens. Isaac is clearly driven by obsession and hatred. He is furious, but Trevor, on the other hand, seems more composed. You can even say he has turned a bit mellow. Maybe the years of battle have worn him down. And that's where things get brutal. The clash continues and Isaac stabs Trevor directly in the chest. The blow goes straight through the heart. And it's not just a glancing blow. The gleam clearly shows that Trevor has collapsed. He is left bleeding and unconscious, but there is still something that the game does not show. It does not show Trevor actually dying. After all, there is no on-screen death confirmation or any dialogue that can declare him dead. So how are we supposed to believe it? Instead, the story takes us back to Hector again. Trevor gives him the responsibility of the hunt because he recognises this is actually Hector's fight now. So did Trevor really die? Well, the game can have multiple endings depending on player conditions. In one version, Trevor confronts Isaac, and in another version, it's Hector who handles the final battle. Trevor stepping aside is not defeat for him, it's all a part of the game's theme. He has already defeated Dracula in 1476, so in 1479, he's no longer shown as the primary hero. He's just a seasoned warrior who is passing the baton, and at the end, he is critically wounded and left for dead. But the story moves forward even without confirming his fate. Trevor Belmont has fallen, but he is not shown exactly dying, and this cliffhanger changes everything. So did Trevor really die? Spoiler, probably not. The big fan theory is that Trevor dies in 1479. I mean, it's only understandable why fans get to this conclusion. He is shown to be stabbed through the heart. It certainly sounds fatal. If you only look at this particular theory and ignore the other facts, it almost feels like a heroic sacrifice moment. But the big question is, does canon support this interpretation as well? Trevor is described as being stabbed by Isaac and left unconscious, but if theories are to be believed, Julia Laforese reached him before he died and healed him. Trevor does survive, but only barely. He is heavily injured but still managed to survive somehow. This is not just some fan theory. We have this straight from the lore summaries compiled from the games and supplementary material. Even if you look at it logically, Trevor could not have died in 1479. If he had died, how can he appear in the later timelines? We see Trevor featuring in Castlevania Symphony of the Night. This clearly means that he must have lived long enough for his legacy and physical remains to exist well beyond the events of Curse of Darkness. Even beyond that, Trevor is referenced so many times throughout the Belmont lineage as the hero who restored the family's honour. He later marries Sifa Belnades, and the Belmont bloodline continues through him. We even know that Belmonts like Simon and Just have descended from him. If you consider him dead in 1479, the entire Belmont lineage will break. And anyways, there is no canon source that says he died in 1479. No official confirmation declaring his death there. According to every timeline, he must have survived. Then why does the myth about his death still go on? That's mainly because the lore which describes the events of 1479 says Trevor was left for dead. This certainly sounds dramatic, but dramatic language is not necessarily canonical confirmation. In gothic fiction like Castlevania, being left for dead often means that the character dies, but not this time. Trevor survives, but only barely, and that barely matters, because it changes how we see the rest of his story. What happens to Trevor after the curse is broken? After Isaac stabs Trevor in the Infinite Corridor, Julia Lafarese finds him. She is able to heal him, but he is too weak to continue fighting. This is an important piece of information. Trevor does not return for a final duel, mainly because he couldn't, and also because the game cannot steal Hector's spotlight. Instead, Hector defeats Isaac and seals the curse. So how does it transform Trevor's story arc? You see, Trevor was the rising hero in 1476, but in 1479 he was just a veteran warrior whose body is not what it used to be. He has carried the vampire killer through several brutal battles. He has already slain Dracula once. So Trevor is no longer the spotlight in the Belmont line. Instead, he becomes a living legend. In the main 15th century storyline, this is Trevor's last confirmed endgame moment. He has survived and the immediate threat is over as the curse is lifted. Dracula still remains defeated, but Hector is the active hero now. It's time for Trevor to step away from the immediate front lines. His story has just transitioned into legacy now. After all, survival doesn't only mean returning constantly for battlefield dominance. Survival can also mean stepping back and letting the story of the next generation unfold. So Trevor surely survived the stab, but he is not the same man afterward. He walks away from the centre of the storm, and the Belmont name continues with him. Where does Trevor fit in the Belmont timeline? Trevor Belmont is central to the Belmont chronology. He is the first Belmont to defeat Dracula directly in 1476 during the events of Dracula's curse. It was his victory which restored the Belmont family's reputation after years of exile. We see Trevor again in 1479 in Curse of Darkness, but now he is older and a seasoned veteran of battles. Here, Trevor acts as the bridge between the medieval era of Dracula's initial fall and the later Belmont generations like Simon Belmont in 1691 and Just Belmont in 1748, but no denying the fact that he is the cornerstone of the Belmont timeline. Later, Belmonts have not just inherited the vampire killer whip, but also inherited the honour which Trevor had reclaimed for them. The Belmont was infamous for being feared outcasts, but Trevor defeating Dracula in 1476 elevated their status to legendary defenders of humanity, and that's why he is treated as a living legend whose victory restored the family's name. And as I told you, he marries Sifa Belnades, and the Belmont lineage continues, and the family remains active in future centuries. If Trevor would have died in 1479, the Belmont lineage would never have been impossible, but the lineage continues, and this fact tells us everything about the speculations of his death. How old is Trevor, and is he retired? So if Trevor didn't die in 1479 even after being brutally stabbed, then when did he die? Or is he still living? If so, then how old is he now and what's he doing? During the events of Dracula's curse in 1476, Trevor was a young man, maybe in his early 20s, so by 1479 he must be in his mid-20s or mostly approaching his 30s depending on the timeline spacing. The fact of the matter is that he is no longer young. He has been busy fighting supernatural threats for years. Now this worn-out hero slowly steps back and lets Hector and the next generation take on the big threats while he focuses on family and passing on the legacy. And his marriage to Sifa and the continuation of the Belmont line proves that he is much more stable now. But does that mean he is retired? Well, you can't say that officially, but narrative-wise, he has surely transitioned from being the primary playable hero after 1479. He is now the established ancestor and a legend on whom future Belmonts look back on. That's not retirement exactly, it's the building of a legend, and legends are only made if you survive long enough to become one. Trevor's later appearances. Just how long does he live? Trevor not only survived in 1479, but actually survived long enough to appear in Castlevania Symphony of the Night as a zombie encounter. He is the undead echo of the legendary Belmont. What more proof do you need of his escape in 1479? I mean, he definitely didn't die in the Curse of Darkness. Otherwise, how can he become a later undead version of himself if he died decades earlier in a way that the timeline contradicts? That's solid proof of his survival, even after being brutally stabbed and left to die. But that's not all. Even later we see Trevor appearing as an honourable veteran Belmont, pulled into a time rift in Castlevania Judgment. The franchise consistently frames Trevor as a living legend whose life extended beyond 1479. He is certainly not a martyr who was cut down in his prime, but he is clearly shown as a warrior who survived and became a living legend. Belmont's curse and the bigger picture. Konami's 2026 teaser for Castlevania Belmont's Curse refers to Trevor as a legendary vampire hunter. This placement by Konami clearly establishes Trevor as a historical pillar of the Belmont lineage, and now his legacy is being passed to a younger Belmont. But what does this promotional framing mean? It surely emphasises Trevor's legacy, but can you build a generational legacy around a hero who secretly died off-screen 3 years after his greatest victory? I don't think so. The franchise treats Trevor as alive long enough to cement the Belmont dynasty, and this modern framing aligns perfectly with the established timeline. His survival after Curse of Darkness is baked into how the developers frame the family's history. Why do some fans think Trevor dies? Castlevania Curse of Darkness has clearly been ambiguous about Trevor's future. Fans of the franchise have debated this ending for years. Some fans interpret the stabbing and the phrase "left for dead" as a definite argument of his death in 1479, but that interpretation doesn't match with the official timeline and lore summaries. The death theory relies on assumption, and it's quite understandable why fans think Trevor dies after being stabbed. But his appearance in Symphony of the Night as a zombie, and also his later appearances, clearly aligns with survival theory, and also aligns with the documented continuity. And in case of a debate, continuity always wins. So the survival theory is not all fan-made, it's a very much a canon-aligned reading. So now you know Trevor Belmont doesn't die in Curse of Darkness. He barely survives and then goes on to become a legend. The stab in 1479 was certainly not the end of his story. It was just the moment when a warrior became a myth, and in a franchise relying so heavily on bloodlines and legacy, becoming a myth is far more powerful than a tragic off-screen death, don't you think?